Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And the most important updates are coming from Chasiv Yar's direction. If you remember a few days ago and during the previous few days we were talking a lot about this direction, and we were talking that the Russians as a result of offensive operation managed to reach the outskirts of the Vyimka railway station, and that there were very heavy clashes, at least according to some sources on the ground. But today on the 4th of April we got the first geolocated video confirming the Russian clashes and the Russian progress on the direction. And as a result of offensive, the Russians managed to establish control over this stronghold, some temporary point somewhere between the fields. Not so important, let's say, but also very important when talking about the global scope of Chasiv Yar's Russian offensive operation. The main idea of the video is that when the Russians started their offensive, the Ukrainians, 10 Ukrainian soldiers, decided not to show any resistance to the Russians, and they started falling back to the north towards the next defense belt. And the Russians during the Ukrainians, let's say, retreat, were bombing and attacking them, and they're bombing and attacking their positions. So for now, let's say as a result of, let's say by the 4th of April, currently the next Ukrainian positions are located, of course, along the railways and on the hill, let's say in front of Russian positions. The Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to establish control, let's say, over the stronghold in the fields, and now the Russians, let's say, got, let's say, something like operational space, and now the Russians can choose where to attack next, and very likely during the next few days we're going to receive more updates about additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation along the railways. I'll remind you that the main forces from the Ukrainian side who are responsible for protection of the territory is the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, and I'll remind you that yesterday the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that the Russians managed to repel few counterattacks from this brigade towards the Russian positions along the railways. Very interesting updates are coming from Verkhnyokamyanska. The Russian sources published another video of a very heavy explosion in the area. I'll remind you that Verkhnyokamyanska is one of the main defense belts in the area that Ukrainians are holding since the ending of the Lysychansk-Severodonetsk battle. The Russians tried to enter this village, let's say 2 years ago, but those attempts were repelled by the Ukrainians, and for now the Russians are renewing their offensive. We know that currently this is one of the most important direction for the Russians, so we'll see what is going to be next. Very interesting reports are coming from Bilogorovka. I'll remind you that yesterday and during the previous few days the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians from Zolotarivka towards Bilogorovka in direction of the forest, trying to bypass the landfill from the south and the southwest, and very likely the Russians managed to gain a foothold on the direction. Yet we haven't received the geolocations confirming that, but very likely this is happened like something like that. Furthermore, we got report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation that the Ukrainians counterattack for several times the Russian positions, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians, having significant losses, were forced to fall back. I'll remind you that the main army, the main brigade of armed forces of Ukraine on the direction is 81st Air Mobile Brigade. And today we got a very interesting report from the very reliable sources that according to the Russians, in Bilogorovka, a unit of the 81st Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was completely defeated. So for now we don't have any geolocations, any videos, any posts in Telegram, Twitter, or let's say the personal accounts of this brigade, but as I told you, very likely that the 81st Brigade was completely defeated during the Ukrainian attempts to counterattack the Russian positions. Very likely most of them were repelled, and now, as I understand, the entire situation and the entire progress of the Russians in the area will be sped up. Now we are moving further to the south in direction of Ivanovskaya Chasiv Yar. The sources reported that Ukrainians started abandoning their positions from the eastern block of Chasiv Yar, but not because of, let's say, great big losses or the Russian complete superiority. No. During the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions from Ivanovskaya to Chasiv Yar. The Russians captured these three lines. According to, let's say, for now, unconfirmed information, geolocated unconfirmed information, the Russians managed to establish control over these three lines. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the forest to the northeast of Chasiv Yar, to the, let's say, southeast of Chasiv Yar, and so on. And all these things, all these updates from the Russian side, forced a significant number of Ukrainians to start falling back. And of course, there is just one way, one position where the Ukrainians can fall back is Chasiv Yar itself. And because of the fact that currently, or at least yesterday, day before yesterday, this area was overpopulated by the Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian commanders decided to, to, let's say, leave some positions, to move some forces from this side of canal towards the central part of Chasiv Yar. So this is just a normal military process of reducing of number of forces or to reducing the concentration of forces on one direction, just to reduce the possible losses as a result from Russian, let's say, aviation bombs or missile strikes. Anyway, the Russians continue advancing, and very likely in a day or two, or maybe in a week, we're gonna start seeing the first clashes inside of Chasiv Yar itself. And the Russians published another video of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the forest to the southeast of this block as a result of multiple launch rocket strikes or tower strikes. The entire position of Ukrainian forces was destroyed, and now the Russians have the safe road for further offensive, let's say from Ivanovska to the southeastern part of Chasiv Yar. So something like this. Very likely the next few days we're going to see this. And now we are moving further. We are going to Zelenopolye, Kurdyumovka, Mayorsk direction. Two different and separate sources, reliable sources, one from the Ukrainian side, one from the Russian side, reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation towards Druzhba. So the source reported that there are clashes in the vicinity of the village by the name of Druzhba, this one, but very likely the Russians are trying to clear the area on the Russian side of Canal, Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, in the area between Mayorsk and Kurdyumovka, Azaryanovka. So very likely currently the Russians are trying to push and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this part of Canal, and very likely during the next few days we're going to receive some updates about the results of this operation. So it's not like a greatest offensive towards Donetsk or New York agglomeration, it's just maintaining the line of combat contact and clearing the area that is located on the Russian side of Canal. Now we are moving to Bakhmut, to Avdiivka direction. We have lots of very interesting details and updates. The sources continue reporting about complete control over Berdych and so on, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of such progress. The Russians from their side continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in Semyonovka, so the clearing process is ongoing. We have very interesting updates from the fields between Umaniske, Yasnobrodovka, Nitailova and Pervomaiska. Some very reliable Russian sources reported that during the previous days of attacks, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the fields between Umanska, Yasnobrodovka and Tonenka. So according to very reliable Russian sources, currently the Russians control something like this. And according to the same sources, now because of the fact that the Russians reached the final true line in front of Yasnobrodovka, the Russians managed to establish complete fire control over the road between Nitailova, Yasnobrodovka and Umanska. And this is already the beginning of collapse of Ukrainian defense belt. Of course, we need to wait a little bit more. We need some geolocated proofs, but something like this currently is happening. Furthermore, the sources reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made significant number of, let's say, counterattacks on the line between Yasnobrodovka, Nitailova, Pervomaiska, with the purpose to restore control over the Ukrainian lost positions in the western part of Vadiana in this area, trying to force the Russians to fall back, let's say, to the Vadiana river. The Ukrainians were trying to return control over these positions with the purpose to, say, counterattack further to the east towards the Russian positions and to attack the Russians in Nitailova, something like this. But as I understand, the Ukrainian attempts to attack Vadiana was repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians, having significant losses, were forced to fall back. The Russians managed to save control over the territory, and today very likely we're going to see more attempts from the Russian side to complete the clearing of Pervomaiska itself. Now we are moving further to the south in direction of Krasnogorovka. The Russians continue publishing the video of artillery and FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainians in the southern part. Once again, very likely the entire Krasnogorovka is under complete Ukrainian control. More details are coming from Novomykhailovka. The Russians continue offensive in the area, and the Russians, according to the same very reliable resources, managed to establish complete control over the fields and the tree lines to the south of Paraskovievka. And according to information we have, the Russians establish control over every single hill in the area around Novomykhailovka. Now under the Ukrainian controls are just lowlands and that's it. And now the Russians have established 5 acquire control over Paraskoivka from this hill, and from this area the Russians are attacking now Krasnogorovka itself. The Russians are attacking Paraskoivka, so it's just the trap for the Ukrainians. The Russians are not completing the battle for Novomikhailivka for some reasons, and the main reason is that Ukrainians continue sending more and more reinforcements inside of the Novomikhailivka, and everything that comes inside of Novomikhailivka stays inside of Novomikhailivka. Nothing can, let's say, leave, and everything can enter. So this is the situation on this direction. And we got another video of FPV drone strike inside of Konstantinovka. This is very important video, and the main importance is that very likely, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is the first video of FPV drone strike inside of Konstantinovka. Before the 4th of April, we used to see just FPV drone strikes inside of Novomikhailivka. This is another video confirming that the front line is moving further to the west. And we haven't received anything more, just some videos and updates about the defense belt that Ukrainians continue building to the north of Orechov, another defense belt completely newly created. We have another defense belt that Ukrainians are trying to create in the vicinity of Odessa. We see the dragon teeth. During the previous days, we saw a lot of, let's say, defense belts in the vicinity of in Sumy area, in Chernigiv and Kharkiv, and we see that Ukrainians continue preparation for defense. Obviously, for now, they don't have any plans to counterattack. And today we got another video, another confirmations of the Russian strikes in Myrieva, the town that located to the southwest of Kharkiv, and few more Gerань strikes inside of the Kharkiv during the night between 4th and 3rd of April. A lot of explosions. We see complete absence of Ukraine air defense and complete Russian air superiority. So this is the situation on this direction. Furthermore, very interesting report we received from Moscow during the previous night. There was a call between the Minister of Defense of Russian Minister of Defense of France. According to the official part, they were talking about the terrorist attack and many different things not related to Ukraine, but very likely Shoigu and the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense of France were talking about the upcoming redeployment of forces on the territory of Ukraine. And some Russians are saying that the France Minister of Defense was calling Shoigu asking permission to redeploy forces. He was saying that the forces are not going to, let's say, take part in clashes, and it's just like a media, let's say, media attack and media event from France side to increase the, let's say, the popularity of the power in France or something like this. And he was just asking permission, asking not to destroy the French forces as soon as they arrive on the territory of Ukraine. Currently, I can't tell you for sure whether it's true or just speculations or just wishful thinking. Obviously, we're going to see this and understand it very soon. And we have another photos of additional batch of martyrs heading from Germany towards Ukraine. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.